All right, I know what you're thinking. You've watched all the reviews already on the ROG Xbox Ally X, and you're probably wondering, what could this guy possibly say that the others haven't? Well, I got you. All right, I'm going to show you some stats and some data analyzing the different performance modes and how the power actually scales across wattage on both the CPU and GPU, and just showing you how far we've come since the original ROG Ally from back in 2023 came out. I'll also try to give a good take on, who this is for from the perspective of both a console gamer and a PC gamer. So yeah, let's start with that first, the difference between Xbox and PC and where this thing falls. I'm already seeing tweets from people like, hey, I can't get Halo to open on my $1,000 Xbox handheld. I paid $1,000 for this handheld and it won't do blank, Oh, by the way, did I mention it was $1,000? Yeah, I get it. You paid a lot of money for it and, it didn't run everything perfectly from the jump. It's not going to be like that because that's more of a console experience. This is more of a PC experience. So, but you kind of have to hold that expectation back a little bit here because this is not truly just an Xbox console. And I knew these types of complaints were going to be pouring in as soon as they announced this thing. And as someone who has had the original Ally and someone who grew up playing Xbox all the way up to the Xbox Series X, the Xbox, it just works. Its purpose is simple, and that's download and play games. A gaming PC or gaming laptop is entirely different, right? It has a steep learning curve. You have to get used to things like Microsoft's updates, Windows updates, updates for the control software Armory Crate, BIOS and driver updates from the support software Asus, and all the different launchers for your game. Steam versus Xbox launcher versus Epic Games launcher and the other ones out there. You have other apps on there you might never use like Microsoft email and Teams. So yeah, the average console gamer is going to see all that and be pretty lost, and understandably. But I've got to say, once you get it down, it's worth it, and I'll explain why. So yeah, the Ally is somewhere in the middle of Xbox and PC. Mostly PC, but it still has a lot of Xbox elements. Yeah, you're going to have to go through a pretty rigorous Windows setup. All that is not going to feel very Xbox. It's not going to feel like a console-like experience at all. I wish they could have somehow made like a custom updater or setup process for it, but that's Microsoft for you. I mean, it's a work in progress always. But once you get past all that, I mean, you can fairly safely run on autopilot with just the built-in Xbox overlay software, which launches by default when you boot it up. So it gets easier after that. And that software, by the way, the Xbox overlay, they claim it saves about 2 gigabytes of system memory, which on a handheld is pretty important. I mean, this thing doesn't have unlimited RAM, right? It does come with more than the original ROG Ally, which is nice, but so yeah, 24 gigabytes from the factory, not bad. And yeah, I wasn't really able to measure a perceivable difference, so right now it seems to kind of be margin of error, but I'm sure there probably is a bit of a benefit once you get to games that are pushing the VRAM or system RAM higher. Now let's talk about the pros of this thing being a PC. So first of all, you can literally have this thing be your entire daily driver for games, office work, school, whatever, if you really wanted to. I mean, you could hook this up, to a Bluetooth mouse or keyboard, hook it up to a monitor like the one behind me here. You can drive those through the USB 4 ports on the back, and all of a sudden it's a desk setup PC. Like, check your emails, do some work, or if you're on the go, it's still got a 7-inch display. I mean, it's like having like an iPad mini or something. It's like a mini handheld PC. The CPU and the integrated graphics here is plenty powerful enough to run most of your programs and even things like Photoshop or video editing software very smoothly. Shoot, I mean, you could even produce music with that CPU. Like, I've used similar CPUs for things like Ableton and they handle it really nicely. So yeah, I mean, this could be your one-stop shop, this little thing right here, which is crazy. Throw it in a bag and it can do anything. That's the beauty of having Windows on there. The capabilities are as far as you want them to go. I mean, you can use them in really unconventional ways. It might not be the best at that thing, but it can handle, whatever you want it to do. And then you also have the XG Mobile, the external mobile GPU for this thing. So you could even make this like a mini desktop replacement if you wanted to. And make sure to subscribe because I will be testing that. I'll have a video coming on that pretty soon as well. I've already done it on this guy with the XG Mobile that had the 4090 in it, so I'm going to try the 5090 on this one and see how they compare. Now, one major downside to this being a PC though that Xbox users might not expect is the difference between your Xbox library and your Xbox PC library. So the games you bought for your Xbox console don't just magically appear on your Xbox PC library. They're actually treated as two separate stores. So depending on the game, your saves might not even transfer over either. So if if you did end up buying, both the console version and the PC version of a game, you could still run into some roadblocks there. However, on the flip side, Xbox PC has more access to games that were previously PlayStation exclusives like Spider-Man or God of War. Like now you can play those on an Xbox ecosystem, which is pretty cool. So, and another perk is you no longer have to pay for Xbox Live to play games online. So another good perk of being on PC. Now let's talk about how far we've come from the original ROG Ally. This one came out in 2023 as a Windows-based response to the success of the Steam Deck, which could only play Steam games. But I was always intrigued by the Ally and actually picked one up off of Facebook Marketplace for pretty cheap, like $300 actually. I ended up doing some of the more well-known mods to it, like the full-size SSD mod and increasing the battery size. So yeah, I mean, that put it a little bit closer to how this one is from the factory. But as far as differences, I mean, the new one, you'll notice right off the bat, it is thicker. That's because it essentially has like the mods that I did on this already built in. So, bigger battery, full-size SSD slot, and then some extras, of course, like bigger grips and more space for cooling, which you'll see soon makes a really big difference, especially in the fan noise. This one feels like an Xbox controller in your hands. It feels really comfortable to play on, and yeah, I do love how compact the original is, but I also really appreciate the ergonomics of the new Xbox Ally. The rest of the differences visually are very subtle. The buttons on the Xbox Ally are louder for some reason, which I'm not a big fan of. But the D-pad is improved. The triggers are bigger on the new Xbox Ally, which I think feels really good. You also get a better port selection with 2 USB 4 ports, which are both USB-C Thunderbolt compatible. So you can get, lightning fast transfer speeds. You can connect things like an external NVMe or connect it to, like a 4K 240 hertz monitor at full bandwidth. So yeah, you can do a lot with USB 4. It's very nice to have. Yes, this one did have one USB-C port that was USB 4, but it was part of the XG Mobile port, which was the proprietary external GPU port. On the new one, the new XG Mobile only needs one USB-C port to operate, so that's a big improvement. I really like how they have these 2 USB-C ports this time around. Now, both have the micro SD card slot, which is really nice for, you could offload some games on there. I wouldn't run any games off of it by any means, but put some games on there that you want to take off the main drive to free up some space, or use it for like storing your highlights and clips and things like that. They also reduced the size of the paddles on the back, which I really appreciate because these I always felt like got in the way on this one. Now, as far as the display, they both have the same 7-inch 120 hertz 1080p touchscreen IPS display with anti-reflective coating. Yeah, it's a mouthful of specs, but it's really nice. I think it's one of the better IPS displays out there. Sure, it's not OLED, but I actually don't really miss having OLED for some reason. I don't know. These are really good, very bright panels, really good contrast. I feel like, it's about 500 nits, so even for moderate amounts of sunlight, it's not bad, especially with that coating on there. So, and yeah, I know some handhelds have a bigger screen, like the Nintendo Switch 2, which I also have, but I don't mind the 7-inch screen at all. I mean, personally, I think it's a really good balance of portability, and it doesn't make it too thick or too heavy, or plus it's nice for when you're gaming at 900p or 720p. You get more FPS without really noticing that loss in sharpness. I'm a huge fan of the display. I think it's awesome. Now, the speakers have greatly improved over the original Ally. It's amazing. I'm actually shocked how loud these get. They're actually better than a lot of laptop speakers that I test. They're extremely loud. I was blown away by how loud this thing could get. The stereo separation effect is also magical feeling. It's hard to explain. Like, even though the speakers are clearly pointing at you this way, you can sort of feel things from your left and right and almost behind you even. Like, it sounds like there's speakers literally to your left and to your right. It's really awesome and mind-boggling that they made that happen. But yeah, here's a sound sample.
Laptop speakers sound good. Do they sound the way that they should? Which one do you think sounds best in this laptop speaker test? Laptop speakers get better every year. These laptop speakers sound so loud and clear. Can you hear the noise? Did your eardrums get destroyed by these laptop speakers? Yeah, they're playing for you.
Now, internally is where things get interesting. Let's start with the CPU side of things. And here's where I like to get a little more analytical, and trust me, it's worth it because there's a lot of cool things happening under the hood here. So let's start with the CPU side of things. The Z2 AI Extreme is the predecessor to the OG Z1 Extreme. And yeah, I know they added AI, which is AMD's MO. They love to do that on everything nowadays. It's dumb, but whatever. Hey, Josh from the future here. I didn't realize when I was filming, but I've been calling my original Ally the Z1 Extreme instead of the Z1 this whole time. So yeah, when I'm referencing the OG Ally, I'm talking about the Z1, which is the lower tier processor. But before you click away, there's still some really useful data in this video. We're still gonna have some comparisons to some major CPUs out there from high power gaming laptops. And of course, I also have a lot of data on the Z1 Extreme just from online sources, so I'll include that as well to give you an idea. But I promise you, I'm trying to make this one of the most informative and data-packed reviews out there to showcase the Xbox Ally X's power from a power scaling perspective, and I think a lot of reviewers don't do that, so please stick around because what I found was very interesting. I tried to edit out every part where I called this the Z1 Extreme, but just in case, if you hear me say it, no, this is the Z1, not the Z1 Extreme. All right, back to the video. But anyways, in the PC world, we use a benchmark called Cinebench to measure CPU performance and efficiency. So I use Cinebench R23 because that's the one I just have the most data for, and I feel like it pushes the CPU more than Cinebench 24 does. Anyways, that's just a personal thing. But yeah, when they're being pushed to the max, the Z2 gets a score of about 14,000 for the multi-core benchmark, which is a 40% increase over the Z1, which scored 10,000 here. And 14,000 puts this in the level of like laptop territory, especially from really powerful laptops from a few years ago that were running their CPUs around 80 to 120 watts or more in this benchmark. So compared to this one running at around 35 watts, that's insane. But it only tells a small part of the story actually, because these CPUs have a range of wattage they can run at. Like it's not just always going to be running at 35 watts. It all depends on whether you're plugged in or on battery. If you're running in silent mode, for example, that's 13 watts or 10 watts on the original Ally. Performance mode is 17 watts. Turbo mode is 25 watts unplugged, 35 watts plugged in. So yeah, a lot of reviews only measure like the peak performance of these devices, which I don't think makes sense because not everybody's going to be running this thing plugged in on turbo mode 24/7. Like it's really nice to see how far we've come in, you know, the low wattage department. How efficient are these CPUs actually? You know, are you going to lose a ton of performance by going down to silent mode or just a little bit? So that's what I'm aiming to showcase here. Because think about it, efficiency is key when it comes to a CPU that's designed to last hours on battery and using very little wattage. So that's why I like to build a power scaling graph. This measures the performance of the device at 5-watt intervals to see how much more CPU performance we're getting for every additional bit of wattage that we add. So looking at this power scaling graph, which you're going to want to see the device score higher on the y-axis and at lower wattages because that indicates really good efficiency. The Z2 maintains a constant lead at all wattages over the Z1, to no surprise of course, with the difference being greater as you apply more wattage. The most noticeable difference I would say is like the 20 watt range and up. That slope just increases more and more on the new Ally instead of how it flattens out on the old one. So that means the more wattage you feed this, it actually continues to get more performance. And I just wanted to see something. I wanted to see how this compared to modern day high-end laptop CPUs, just to see how they do at these low wattage numbers and understand why they picked this CPU for this device. So let's take a look at some other AMD offerings first. First, we have the AMD HX370, which is one of AMD's best efficient CPUs right now. That one can be found in the ProArt P16 or the Zephyrus G14, which a lot of people are familiar with on the laptop side. And sure enough, it performs better across the board, except for at that 10 watt level. So pretty good. The AMD AI Max Plus 395, which is a crazy name I know, is quite possibly AMD's best performing mobile chip. And same thing here. I mean, with even more of a drastic difference once you get to 20 watts or higher. And then on the Intel side, you have their efficient chip for gaming, the 285H, which scores lower at lower wattages, but then pretty similar to just barely passing it as you go up. And then lastly, I'm just going to throw in the Intel 275HX here, which is essentially a desktop CPU. This thing sucks at low wattage and it doesn't really get better until about 35 watts or so, which is like the max power of the Ally. And yeah, that chip is designed obviously to go way beyond that. You know, it hits like 200 watts or something, but it's just really not good at that lower wattage level, which is why CPUs like this really struggle in gaming laptops when they're running on battery and providing good battery life. Okay, one last point really quick here is single core on the CPU. So single core helps a lot with tasks on battery, things that are single threaded. A lot of programs and games are still single threaded and don't really take use of multiple cores. So this can be really important, especially if, you know, think about like 10 watts and below. This contributes a lot to like overall snappiness. So still very important. And of course, yeah, there's a measurable improvement from the Z1 to the Z2 here, but I just want to quickly put all the CPUs on the screen here and just show you, hey, the Z2 is better than all of them, especially once you get to 10 watts and above. It even excels beyond AMD's best offerings right now in the mobile department. So I think that's another reason why they might have chose this chip. Like, they really did not want you to experience any hiccups here. But yeah, then why wouldn't they put one of those other CPUs in this guy? Why did they choose the Z2? Well, let's look at the GPU performance, and that might help answer the question, because it's not all about CPU here. Your GPU is what helps push those graphics to the limit and helps a lot in visually demanding games, which we see developers pushing more and more. So to measure this, I use 3D Mark Time Spy, which is a great benchmark for showing how your GPU performs and how it translates in games. So of course, the higher score you get here, the more FPS that you can expect in most games. But of course, we'd like to see those numbers higher at lower wattages so that you don't always have to have your device running at its highest performance mode and draining that battery super fast. So right off the bat, except for at 10 watts, the Z2 has a massive lead here over the Z1, and that's going to be your biggest contributor to those higher FPS numbers. We're talking nearly a 3 times increase at some levels. Like, that's where things got interesting this time around. But now let's bring in some of those laptops. So look at the HX 370's Radeon 890M graphics. This one looked really good on the CPU side, but actually performs worse than the Z2 on the graphics side. The AMD AI Max 395 Plus has the Radeon 8060S graphics on board, and like I said, this is AMD's best mobile chip offering as of 2025, and even it doesn't surpass this thing until 25 watts. However, of course, beyond 25 watts it scores insanely better. But the problem here is this is a really big chip. It's an APU and it's really expensive, so I just don't think it could have worked in this device. You can find this one in the much bigger and much more expensive tablet, the Flow Z13 from Asus. But yeah, even though it performs insanely well at 30 watts or above, I feel like Asus didn't want to sacrifice performance at those lower wattage levels, because this is meant to be on battery most of the time. So yeah, that's why I don't think they chose that chip here. Now, the Intel 285H has the Intel Arc 140T graphics on board, and it again just doesn't do enough below that 20 watt level, while only barely being better beyond that. So there you have it. That is why they chose the Z2. And I'll show you how each of these power profiles does in games, because most reviews only show results in turbo mode. But like I said, I want you to see how these do no matter what, if you're playing silent mode, performance mode, turbo, or even plugged in for full wattage. All right, so starting with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and keep in mind these are running at, the highest preset. This is running at 1080p, which is the native, max resolution of this display. So, I mean, from the jump, it's pretty obvious we're getting about almost double the FPS on the Xbox Ally X versus the original ROG Ally. And that's pretty consistent on every performance profile, especially silent mode. Like, look at that, 9 FPS before, 25 FPS now. And again, this is at the highest preset settings of this game. You could easily turn it down to medium and get much better FPS than this, and it still looks amazing, but I just ran it at that to really push the device. Now, obviously, if we look at this in comparison to like some gaming laptops, those are getting, 150 to 200 FPS in this same benchmark. So, it is what it is, but, those have a full-on dedicated GPU running at like 100 to 175 watts. So, and of course, they're a lot louder. For a quiet little handheld device, this is still really impressive. Next, I ran Cyberpunk 2077 on the Steam Deck preset. And again, we're hitting about just almost double of the original ROG Ally, with once again, that silent mode is just insanely better. It's literally running at 13 watts here, which is so low of a wattage, guys. It's crazy. This is the only gaming benchmark I could find with the actual Z1 Extreme for comparison. You can see it's about 15% behind the new Z2 Extreme. So not a crazy difference, but there is something. And just to push it a little little further, I just wanted to try ray tracing here. We were able to hit 29 FPS on the Xbox Ally X. Again, about doubling what we could do before on the original Ally, which is not bad for ray tracing. I mean, we could easily throw in, you know, frame generation or something like that, maybe lower a couple other settings, and you could easily hit 60 FPS or more. Battlefield 6, I'm on a custom low medium settings, which I'll show you here in a second. But yeah, once again, almost double that of the original Ally. And then last year, just as a bonus, I want to talk about Cyberpunk on the Ultra preset. This is a very demanding preset for this game. Obviously, you can see we're getting over double that of the original Ally here, but we're still only hitting like 22 FPS. This is at 1440p, by the way. This is not at 1080p anymore. I'm running it that way because I just want to show you what an external GPU can do. So if you wanted to make this a desk setup and plug in the ROG XG Mobile, I don't have the new one yet, but this is what it did on the old Ally. When I plugged in the 4090 XG Mobile to it, we went from 9 FPS to 92 FPS. So yeah, that's a huge jump. And I'm sure the 5090 Mobile will have an even bigger advantage. So yeah, really excited to try that out. Again, this is just showing you the potential of what this thing can do if you wanted to make this, you know, a portable gaming setup that you could, you know, set up anywhere, or make it your desk setup with, you know, the XG Mobile that you could just plug into when you're ready to game on a monitor or something like that. And I wanted to give you a direct comparison on Battlefield 6 just so I can show you in real time how this can work, right? So these are the settings I'm running at. I'm just going to go through it really quickly here. FSR is on quality mode. We're at 900p. On the new Ally, you can see, you know, we're hitting a little over 70 FPS. This is in the campaign. I'm just running around trying to see how this looks. It's running at 35 watts. This is plugged in. The old Ally can barely hit 40 FPS here, sometimes dipping below that. If you unplug, it goes down to 25 watts, which is still scoring better than the old Ally running at 30 watts unplugged on its turbo mode. Now, instead, if we do balance mode, again, you can see we're in the upper 40s of FPS. The original Ally is in the upper 20s, low 30s. So around the same wattage, we're hitting, you know, a few warmer degrees on the temperatures, but again, it's just performing so much better. Silent mode, once again, this one has a huge difference. Look how it's like falling apart on the original Ally. It looks like it's starting to look like a slideshow. Whereas on the Xbox Ally X, it is still very playable, and there's things you can do to sort of help it get to even higher FPS. One of which is frame generation. Look at this. We're getting over 100 FPS now just from turning on frame generation in the turbo mode. Now, that's not to say that hitting over 100 FPS on the original Ally is impossible. You just have to do a little bit more to get there. So for example, I can turn down FSR to balanced instead of quality. This will lower visual fidelity a little bit, turn on frame gen, and lower the resolution. If I leave it at 900p, we're a little over 70 FPS. However, if I drop it down to 720p, you know, now we're hitting around 90 to 100 FPS or so. So it is possible. You're just gonna have to make a few more sacrifices to get there. Now I'm gonna show you some clips of the fan noise compared here, but right off the jump, I just wanna say, you know, the turbo mode on battery is the biggest difference. It is insane. So you're going from like 38 decibels, and it's pretty high pitched, by the way. For a handheld, that's not terrible. Like laptops can get up to 50 decibels, which is way louder here, but 38 decibels is definitely audible, right? Especially when it's at a high pitch. The new Xbox Ally X only hits about 32 decibels in its turbo mode. So, and it's a lot lower pitch, so it's a lot easier on the ears. And with the way decibels scale, you know, that doesn't sound like much, I know, but like 32 to 38 decibels is a huge difference in volume. For example, each decibel is roughly a 10% increase in volume. So when you think about it that way, it's like a 60% louder device, the OG Ally. So that's just something I was super impressed with. And I want to touch on battery life, of course, but essentially it's basic math, right? 80 watt hour battery, silent mode uses 13 watts. So that's a little over 6 hours of gaming. Performance mode uses 17 watts. So that's 4.7 hours of gaming. And then turbo mode uses 25 watts, which is about 3.2 hours of gaming. Obviously, this can improve if you're just playing very low power games that are not very visually demanding, like 2D side scrollers and stuff like that. Then you can expect probably, you know, like an extra hour or so battery life. However, if you're just just using this for browsing or, watching YouTube or movies, things like that, this guy uses like less than 7 watts, which that's insane. You're going to get like 12 hours or more of battery life in those situations. I've seen upwards of like 20 hours even. So that's crazy, right? That's insane for a device like this. This beats out most gaming laptops in that regard. So this could easily give you all day battery life in basic tasks, taking notes, checking emails, things like that. Now let's talk about how one of these can actually potentially beat your console. So I got to give some major props here on the PC gaming space. You have some pretty advanced tools at your disposal that could actually get games running better on your handheld than on your console. Like with a CPU this powerful and this efficient, like the C2 here, you're running games at essentially 10% of the power that a normal Xbox console would be running them at. Yet you can achieve similar graphics or potentially better frame rates and graphics than your console thanks to tech like AMD's FSR4 and frame generation. So one thing to keep in mind, CPUs excel at lower resolutions. So on a 7-inch display like that, 720p, 900p, those look pretty good. It's not trying to crank out, 4K like a console is, how it's usually upscaling from like 1080p to 4K. On here, you can be upscaling from like 600p or 720p to 1080p or 900p. That's a lot less pixels for this thing to run, and it can still look really good, which gives you a lot more room for pushing settings and pushing frame rates higher than you could on your console. For example, you could push settings to like medium or high and then use AMD's FSR4 for really good upscaling, although the implementation really depends on the game and its optimization, but then you could turn on something like frame generation and boom, you got 120 FPS. Let's be real, there are games on Xbox that are capped at 30 frames per second, even when it could handle more than that, and you can't do anything about it. Sometimes they give you the option of a performance mode versus a quality mode where you can hit like 60 FPS or 40 FPS, but they lower the graphics in compensation of that. With something like this, you get a lot more options. So yeah, there's a steep learning curve, of course, like, Battlefield 6, for example, you got to scroll through all these graphic settings, there's custom settings and all these other lists beyond that, advanced settings, tabs, and all this stuff. But once you figure it out, you can get, frame generation going, upscaling going, lower some graphics options, but you can raise others to compensate and potentially get, 120 frames per second or more. And that's just on Battlefield. I mean, you think about some games that are locked to 30 frames per second on Xbox, whereas you can push those to 120 on here. It's not just like a magical bullet. Like, it's not going to just run any game at 120 guaranteed. This all comes down to things like optimization and how much they've implemented things like FSR and frame generation and things like that. So, but all I'm saying is you have a lot of potential here that consoles don't have. And that is a big advantage to PC gaming. So yeah, overall, we have come a long way in the handheld space. Like, this was only just 2 years ago. We've gotten about like double the FPS in some games and a lot more performance at lower wattage on a device like this in just 2 years. And then other improvements like lower fan noise. And sure, it's not perfect. A lot of people are going to complain still about PC settings and updates and all that stuff. And I get it. Although I will say I really do like the Xbox full screen experience. I think it's going to continue to improve. One thing that Microsoft is good at least, is a constant improvement and things like that, especially when it comes to Xbox. So I do think over the years, you're going to see more improvements to the software, and of course, hardware capabilities will continue to improve as well. It's one of those things, really has an all-in-one feel to it. I find myself gaming on here sometimes more than I do on my laptop, which can handle like 4 times the FPS and graphics as this one can. But they know what they've got here. They know what they're doing. That's why it's like coming in at that $1,000 range. Like, this is an all-in-one experience that you can take with you wherever you want to go, and you can do way more than just game on it. So people got to remember, this is competing more in this space than it is in the console space. And although I don't really agree on the $1,000 price tag, everything is just more expensive right now in the electronics world, so I'm also not surprised by that price. Another thing with the cost to consider, this Xbox Ally X, yes, you could get the lower tier model that performs more like this one, but it's like 3 times the cost of finding one of these used. Like, I got this one for $300, this one's $1,000. Take with that what you will. This one does perform at sometimes double or 3 times the performance as this one, with its own benefits on top of that. So it's you know, there's trade-offs no matter which one you get. And of course, it comes down to how much you're willing to spend. And despite it being that high, I still recommend it. I think this is an awesome handheld. I think it's better than a lot of others. Personally, I feel like it's the one I would choose over like a Steam Deck due to that one, you know, being limited to Steam only. Legion Go, even though that one has, you know, it's got a bigger screen, it's really nice, but it's thicker, it's heavier, it has its limitations too. So there's always going to be some trade-offs depending on which one you get. Doesn't really matter, but I really like this one. I like where they're going with it, and I can't wait to see what they do in the future. If you're interested in picking one up, I have links in the description for where you can buy these at. Using my links really helps support the channel, so I really appreciate if you do decide to use that. Also really appreciate if you give the video a like, a comment, and make sure to subscribe because I have a lot more content coming out on handhelds, gaming laptops, things like that. So stay tuned for all of that, and I will see you guys in the next one.